The morning ritual had been the same for over 7 years. I would wake before the neighborhood stirred, when darkness still clung to the trees and only the earliest birds had begun their songs. With my thermos of coffee in one hand and my paddle in the other, I would make the short walk from my back door, down the gentle slope of land, to where my canoe waited, tethered to the small wooden dock I had built with my own hands. That dock, that launch, was my pride, not because it was anything fancy. It was simple: pressure-treated lumber, weather-resistant screws, and countless hours of sweat equity. What made it special was how it connected me to the water, to nature, to something bigger than myself and the pressures of daily life. There is something sacred about water at dawn, when mist hovers just above the surface and the world holds its breath before waking. I would push off from the shore, guiding my canoe into deeper water with gentle, practiced strokes. The ripples would spread out behind me, catching the first light of day. These moments were mine. Out there I found clarity, I found peace. I found the parts of myself that got buried under deadlines and responsibilities. No phones, no emails, just the rhythm of the paddle and the quiet acceptance of the lake. Over time, others in the neighborhood discovered my little launch point. First, it was just David from 3 doors down. He asked if he could use it for his kayak, and of course I said yes. Then came the Millers with their stand-up paddleboards. Soon, without any formal announcement, the small dock became an unspoken community resource. I never minded. There was something beautiful about seeing others connect with the water, too. We kept it respectful. People would wave if they saw me out there. Sometimes we would cross paths and exchange pleasantries about the weather or wildlife sightings. But mostly it remained a quiet place, an escape, a pocket of simplicity in an increasingly complicated world. The neighborhood association, our HOA, barely acknowledged its existence for years. It was just there, like the old oak tree at the park entrance or the stone bench by the walking trail. Then Linda Peterson became HOA president. I remember the day she took office, standing at the front of our community center with her pearl necklace and practiced smile. "I promise to maintain our property values and ensure our neighborhood remains the safest, most desirable area in the county," she had said. The words seemed innocent enough at the time. I did not recognize them for what they were: a declaration of control. It started small. New signs appeared around the neighborhood. No parking, no skateboarding, lawn maintenance required weekly. Then came the letters citing violations for everything from trash cans left out too long to unapproved mailbox colors. But Linda was smart. She never targeted everyone at once. She moved methodically, picking off homeowners one by one so there was never enough collective outrage to challenge her. I first noticed her eyeing my launch one Saturday morning as I was returning from a paddle. She was walking the shoreline with a clipboard, making notes and taking photos. When I asked what she was doing, she smiled that political smile. All teeth, no warmth. "Just doing a safety assessment for the board," she said. "We have concerns about unregulated water access, insurance risks, you know." I did not know then what those words would lead to. I should have. The clipboard, the photos, the way she lingered, assessing my dock like it was a problem to be solved rather than a connection to be cherished. I should have seen the storm brewing. But like most storms, you never quite believe how bad it will be until you are standing in the middle of it, soaked to the bone, wondering how you missed the warning signs. 3 weeks later, I woke to my alarm as usual, grabbed my coffee and paddle, and headed toward the water. That was when I saw it. A chain-link fence, 6 feet tall, wrapped around the entire shoreline access point. My launch was on the other side, visible but unreachable. And there, hanging from the center of the gate, a gleaming new padlock and a laminated sign. "Restricted area, HOA authorized access only. TRESPASSERS will be FINED." The HOA meeting was scheduled for 7:00 p.m. in the community center. I arrived at 6:45, determined to remain calm and rational despite the anger churning inside me. The room filled quickly. Most meetings drew only a handful of residents, but word had spread about the new fence, and curiosity had brought out a larger crowd than usual. I chose a seat near the front, my folder of documents, property maps, HOA bylaws, and photos of the launch before and after resting in my lap. Linda called the meeting to order exactly on time, dressed in a navy blazer with that gold HOA president pin catching the fluorescent light. She moved efficiently through the standard agenda items: budget reports, upcoming community events, and landscaping updates. Her voice was measured, authoritative. She knew how to command a room. Finally, she reached the new business portion of the agenda. "Now I would like to address the recent safety improvements to our lakefront area," she said, clicking to a PowerPoint slide showing the new fence. "As many of you know, we have installed security fencing to restrict unauthorized access to the water. This decision was made following several concerning incidents and risk assessment by our insurance provider." My hand shot up immediately. Linda glanced at me, hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Jim, you have a question." "Not a question," I said, keeping my voice steady. "A point of clarification. What concerning incidents are you referring to? In 7 years, there has not been a single accident or issue at that launch." Linda's smile tightened. "Perhaps not reported formally, but we have had several close calls. Mrs. Abernathy noted children accessing the water unsupervised last summer. Mr. Wilson reported seeing non-residents using the area, and our walkthrough revealed erosion and structural concerns with the unauthorized dock construction." I looked around the room at my neighbors. Most avoided eye contact, studying their shoes or the ceiling tiles. They knew what was happening but were unwilling to challenge it. Fear is a powerful motivator in small communities where social standing matters. "I would like to see documentation of these incidents," I said, "and the legal basis for restricting access without a community vote. Section 7.3 of our bylaws states that major changes to common areas require a majority approval." Linda shuffled some papers, then looked up with practiced concern. "This was not a major change, but a safety necessity. Our insurance provider identified significant liability issues that required immediate action. We are simply being prudent." "Then I would like to see the insurance assessment," I pressed. "Those documents are still being processed," she replied smoothly. "We can revisit this at a later date when all paperwork is finalized. For now, the board has acted within its authority to protect the community." Before I could respond, she moved on to the next agenda item. The discussion was over before it had truly begun. I sat there, stunned by the casual dismissal, by how easily she had sidestepped accountability. 3 days later, I found a violation notice in my mailbox. "Unauthorized shoreline modifications, $150 fine." It cited a bylaw about structural changes to common areas without approval. The very dock that had existed for 7 years that Linda herself had photographed just weeks ago was now suddenly in violation. The retaliation could not have been clearer. I appealed the fine. The appeal was denied. I requested a hearing. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later, conveniently after the next board vote on permanent water access policies. Each move I made was countered with procedural delays and technical objections. The system was working exactly as designed, not for fairness, but for control. At the next meeting, Linda presented a formal motion to permanently close the launch area and repurpose it as a natural conservation space. No human access permitted. The vote passed 4-1, with only newcomer board member Rebecca Marshall voting against it. My neighbors watched silently, uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up. The fear was palpable. I left that meeting feeling something I had not felt in years, powerless, but buried beneath that feeling was something else, something harder and more determined. If Linda wanted to play with rules and procedures, then I needed to change the game entirely. That night, I began researching land ownership laws, property boundaries, and public water access rights. I would not fight her directly. I would go deeper. I would go for the foundation. Knowledge is a curious thing. It hides in plain sight, buried under layers of assumption and tradition. For years, everyone in our neighborhood had simply accepted that the shoreline belonged to the HOA. No one questioned it. No one investigated. We believed what we were told because it was easier than digging for the truth. I started at the county records office, a place most people never visit in their lifetime. The building itself was unremarkable: beige walls, fluorescent lighting, and the distinct smell of old paper and dust. The clerk looked surprised when I requested the property records for our subdivision. These documents rarely saw the light of day once filed. "Full subdivision survey?" she asked, peering over her glasses. "That is going to be quite extensive." Just the lakefront parcels, I clarified, and any easements or access rights documentation. She disappeared into the back room and returned 20 minutes later with a large cardboard box filled with manila folders. "These go back to the original development," she said. "Good luck finding what you need." I spent hours that first day combing through survey maps, deed restrictions, and property transfers. Most of it was standard developer language, setbacks, utility corridors, drainage plans. But on the fourth survey map, dated 15 years before our homes were built, I noticed something odd. The shoreline was marked differently than the surrounding lots. It had a separate parcel number. I flagged the page and kept digging. 3 folders later, I found it, the missing piece. The 50-foot strip of land between the housing lots and the actual water's edge had never been deeded to the HOA. It had been retained by the original developer, Lakeside Properties Limited, and later transferred to a private trust, the Thompson Family Conservation Trust. My heart raced as I requested all documents related to this trust. The clerk returned with a significantly thinner folder. Inside was the answer I had been searching for. The trust had been established to maintain natural shoreline character with limited, responsible access. More importantly, the trustee was listed as Martin Thompson, with contact information in Arizona. I called a real estate attorney the next morning, Sarah Daniels, recommended by a colleague from work. She listened carefully as I explained the situation. "So the fence the HOA installed may actually be on trust property, not HOA property?" she asked, leaning forward with interest. "That is what the records suggest," I replied. "And if that is true, they have no authority to restrict access." Sarah nodded. "This happens more often than people realize. Developers create complicated ownership structures, and over time, the details get lost. Let me make some inquiries about the current status of this trust." 3 days later, Sarah called with news. "The Thompson Family Conservation Trust is technically in probate limbo," she explained. "Martin Thompson passed away 18 months ago, and his son Joshua is the successor trustee. The trust assets, including that shoreline parcel, are currently in a transitional state." "What does that mean for the HOA fence?" I asked. "It means they likely had no legal right to install it. But more interestingly," Sarah continued, "it means the parcel could potentially be acquired by a new owner." I sat up straighter. "Is that possible to buy it?" "Possible, yes. Simple, no. But I can reach out to Joshua Thompson to discuss options." What followed was weeks of careful negotiation. Sarah discovered something else during her research. Linda, our HOA president, had attempted to purchase the parcel for the HOA 6 months earlier, but had been rejected due to concerns about her plans for development. The trust's conservation mandate conflicted with her vision for an improved shoreline amenity, with concrete retaining walls and controlled access points. Joshua Thompson, it turned out, was an environmental scientist who shared his father's vision for preserving natural shorelines. When Sarah explained my situation and my history with the simple wooden launch, he was receptive. We arranged a video call where I shared photos of the launch before the fence, emphasizing its minimal impact and how it had fostered community connection to the water. "My father would have approved of your approach," Joshua said. "He always believed water access should be respectful, not commercial." We negotiated a fair price, not cheap, but within my means by leveraging some retirement savings. The paperwork moved quietly, without announcement or fanfare. Linda, focused on her next neighborhood improvement project, remained oblivious to our discussions. 38 days after discovering the records, I met Sarah at the county clerk's office. Joshua had flown in from Arizona to finalize the transaction in person. We signed the transfer documents, shook hands, and filed the new deed. It was official. I now owned the 50-foot strip of shoreline that included my canoe launch and the land under Linda's precious fence. I held the deed in my hands, feeling its weight. Physical, yes, but also symbolic. This was not just a piece of paper. It was leverage. It was the turning of the tide. Linda had weaponized rules against me. I had responded by changing the board on which the game was played. "Would you like me to notify the HOA of the ownership change?" Sarah asked as we left the building. I shook my head. Not yet. I believe in the element of surprise. A plan was forming, not for revenge but for justice. Not for punishment but for correction. The fence would come down. But first, I wanted Linda to feel the same powerlessness she had inflicted on others. Sometimes, the most effective lessons require personal experience. The following Saturday arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, mild temperature, and just enough activity in the neighborhood to ensure witnesses. I had chosen the timing deliberately. Weekend mornings were when people tended their gardens and walked their dogs. Eyes would be watching. That was essential to my plan. I parked my truck near the shoreline access point and unloaded my tools: bolt cutters, a cordless drill, work gloves, and a handcrafted wooden sign I had spent the previous evening creating. The sign was simple but clear. Private launch, authorized neighbors welcome, property of James Wilson. I had even added my phone number at the bottom for access requests. The padlock surrendered to the bolt cutters with a satisfying snap. One by one, I removed the fence panels, carefully stacking them on my truck bed. I did not rush. I worked methodically, as if performing routine maintenance rather than an act of defiance. Neighbors walked by, slowing their pace to observe. Some nodded in greeting. Others hurried past, already reaching for their phones. I knew Linda would be informed within minutes. That was part of the plan. Just as I was securing the new sign to a post, I heard the unmistakable sound of tires crunching gravel at high speed. Linda's white SUV screeched to a halt, and she emerged like a storm cloud, face flushed and eyes wide. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded, marching toward me. Her voice carried across the morning air, drawing more attention from curious neighbors. "This is HOA property. You have no authority to remove association security measures." I continued working, driving the final screw into my sign before turning to face her. I made sure my movements remained calm, unhurried. The contrast between her frantic energy and my steady composure was deliberate. "Good morning, Linda," I said, my voice clear enough to carry to the small audience gathering at a respectful distance. "I am simply removing unauthorized structures from my property." "Your property?" She laughed, but there was uncertainty creeping into her tone. "This shoreline belongs to the association. You know that perfectly well." I reached into my back pocket and removed the folded deed, protected in a clear plastic sleeve. I had made several copies, this one specifically for this moment. "Actually, it does not, and never did." I handed her the document. "This 50-foot strip of shoreline, including the launch area, legally belongs to me as of Wednesday. The fence you installed was on private property without permission. Technically, that is trespassing." Linda snatched the document, her hands trembling slightly as she scanned it. I could see the moment reality sank in, her eyes widened, her posture stiffened, and her breathing quickened. For perhaps the first time since I had known her, Linda Peterson was speechless. "This cannot be right," she finally managed. "The board approved, we voted, there are liability issues." "You voted to restrict access to property you did not own," I corrected her. "As for liability, that is now my concern, not the HOA's. I have already updated my homeowner's insurance accordingly." Linda's face cycled through emotions: shock, disbelief, anger, and finally, the one I had been waiting for, fear. The realization that she had lost control of the situation was dawning on her. "The association will challenge this," she said, straightening her posture in an attempt to regain authority. "We will file an injunction. You cannot just—" "You are welcome to try," I interrupted calmly. "My attorney has already reviewed the situation thoroughly. But before you waste HOA funds on a legal battle you cannot win, you might want to consider the other implications." "What implications?" she asked, suspicion narrowing her eyes. "We can discuss those at the next board meeting," I said. "For now, I would appreciate it if you would remove your vehicle from my property." The word "my" hung in the air between us. Linda looked around, suddenly aware of the neighbors watching the exchange. Her carefully cultivated image of authority was cracking in public view. Without another word, she turned and walked back to her SUV, still clutching the deed copy. By that afternoon, the news had spread throughout the neighborhood. My phone began ringing with calls from neighbors curious about what had happened. I kept my explanations simple and factual, without embellishment or gloating. The truth was powerful enough without dramatization. Over the next few days, I completed my vision for the launch. I installed simple solar-powered lights along the path for safety. I added a small rack where neighbors could temporarily store kayaks or paddleboards. And most importantly, I installed security cameras, not to restrict access, but to document any attempts to interfere with the property. The most telling change, however, was in how people now interacted with Linda. The reverent fear had disappeared. At the grocery store, neighbors who once scurried away now stood their ground. At community gatherings, they spoke freely without seeking her approval. Something fundamental had shifted. By challenging her authority effectively, I had broken the spell for everyone. The emperor had no clothes, and now everyone could see it. Insurance policies are fascinating documents. Most people never read them, signing at the bottom and filing them away until disaster strikes. But within those dense paragraphs of legalese lie vulnerabilities and leverage points, if you know where to look. During my research into the property records, I had requested copies of the HOA insurance documentation. Not the summary that Linda distributed at meetings, but the actual policy with all its endorsements and exclusions. What I found was the perfect pressure point. The HOA's umbrella liability policy had been written with specific language regarding water features and access points. The premium calculation included a substantial discount based on controlled shoreline access and association-maintained water safety protocols. The policy explicitly listed the Canoe launch area as HOA property that now belonged to me. I called the insurance company directly, asking to speak with an underwriter about policy changes. After navigating several layers of customer service, I reached Denise Carter, a senior underwriter who specialized in community association coverage. "I am calling to inform you of a property ownership change that affects an active policy," I explained, providing the policy number. "I recently purchased a parcel of land that your records show as being owned by Lakeside Estates HOA. Denise was professional but cautious. "What kind of parcel are we discussing?" "Waterfront property that includes a canoe launch and shoreline access," I replied. "According to your policy documentation, this area is currently factored into the HOA's risk assessment and premium calculation." There was a pause as Denise reviewed the information. "Yes, I see that now. This does change the risk profile significantly. The HOA's current premium is based partially on their control of all water access points." "They no longer control this access point," I confirmed, "and I thought you should be made aware to ensure accurate underwriting." "Thank you for bringing this to our attention, sir. We will need to reevaluate the policy and adjust the premium accordingly." I could have stopped there. The notification itself would trigger a review and likely a rate increase. But I had one more card to play, one that would ensure Linda and the board understood the full consequences of their actions. "There is one more thing you should know," I added. "The HOA installed a fence on this property without permission, claiming safety concerns. Given their expressed safety worries about this water access point, you might want to review whether they have properly disclosed all incident reports and risk assessments in their policy application." This was the masterstroke. By highlighting their own safety claims, I was triggering a more thorough review of their entire policy. Insurance companies do not appreciate discovering undisclosed risks, especially when those risks have been documented in official HOA minutes and correspondence. 2 weeks later, the HOA board received their updated insurance premium notice. The rate had doubled. The explanation cited undisclosed water access liability and changed property boundaries affecting risk assessment. Linda called an emergency board meeting that same evening. I was not invited, but Rebecca Marshall, the dissenting board member who had voted against closing the launch, called afterward to fill me in. "It was chaos," she reported. "Linda kept saying there must be a mistake, that the insurance company was overreacting, but when they reviewed the actual policy language, it was clear. The HOA had been getting a special rate based on controlling all water access. With your property now creating an uncontrolled access point, Their entire risk profile changed. "How did the other board members react?" I asked. "They are panicking about the budget," Rebecca said. "This increase will either require a special assessment on all homeowners or cutting other services. No one is happy, and several people directly asked Linda why she installed a fence on property the HOA did not own." The pressure was building. The next day, Linda herself appeared at my door. Her usual confident demeanor had dissolved into something closer to desperation. "We need to discuss the shoreline situation," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Perhaps we can reach some kind of agreement, an easement maybe, or shared maintenance responsibilities." "I am not interested in an easement," I replied calmly. "The property is private now." "But the insurance rates," she began, "are a direct result of your actions," I finished for her. "You closed access without proper authority. You installed structures without permission. You claimed safety concerns that you are now trying to disavow. These consequences are of your own making." Linda's facade cracked further. "What do you want? Just tell me what you want to make this go away." I looked at her directly. "I do not want anything from you, Linda. I simply want to enjoy my property without interference. The same thing I wanted before you put up that fence." She left without another word, but I knew this was not the end. The financial pressure on the HOA would continue mounting. Board members would face angry homeowners demanding explanations. The comfortable power structure Linda had built was crumbling from within, and all because she had chosen the wrong battle with the wrong person. Sometimes justice arrives not with dramatic confrontation, but with the quiet inevitability of consequences. The community center had never been so full. Every chair was taken, forcing latecomers to stand along the walls. The air was thick with tension and expectation. This was not a regular HOA meeting. It was the reckoning that had been building for weeks. The emergency session had been called to address what the notice described as urgent financial and legal matters affecting the association. No specific mention of insurance rates or shoreline property, but everyone knew. Word had spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, each retelling adding new details and speculation. I arrived early, choosing a seat in the middle row, visible but not confrontational. I brought a folder containing copies of all relevant documents, the property deed, insurance policy excerpts, and a timeline of events leading to this moment. I did not know if I would need them, but preparation had served me well so far. The board members filed in at exactly 7:00 p.m. Linda led the procession, her usual confident stride now stiff and mechanical. The other 4 board members followed, their expressions ranging from resignation to open anxiety. The atmosphere felt like a trial rather than a meeting. Linda called the session to order, her voice slightly higher than usual, a subtle tell of her discomfort. "Thank you all for coming on such short notice. We have several urgent matters to discuss regarding association finances and property boundaries." She attempted to start with routine business, but Joseph Hernandez, a normally quiet homeowner from the east side of the neighborhood, interrupted. "With all due respect, Madam President, could we address the insurance premium increase directly? Many of us received notice of a special assessment, and we deserve an explanation." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Linda's knuckles whitened as she gripped the podium. "Very well. As some of you may have heard, our insurance carrier has reassessed our policy and implemented a rate increase. This is due to changed circumstances regarding shoreline property that was previously thought to be under HOA jurisdiction." "You mean the property you put a fence on without checking who owned it?" called a voice from the back. Linda flushed. "The board acted on information available at the time, we believed." "The information was always available," interrupted Rebecca Marshall, breaking ranks with her fellow board members. "County records are public. We just never bothered to check before taking action." The room erupted in overlapping questions and comments. Linda banged her gavel repeatedly, trying to regain control. "One at a time, we must maintain order." But order was precisely what was slipping away from her. For years, these meetings had operated under strict procedural rules that limited genuine discussion. Now, the dam had broken. Homeowners who had suffered under Linda's rigid enforcement demanded answers about other decisions. Had other violations been arbitrary? Were other policies built on shaky legal ground? Thomas Wilson, a retired attorney who had previously kept his opinions to himself, stood slowly. The room quieted as he spoke. "I move that we hold a vote of no confidence in the current president," he said, his voice carrying the weight of legal authority. "The handling of the shoreline matter demonstrates a pattern of inadequate due diligence that has now exposed the association to significant financial liability." The motion was immediately seconded by 3 different voices. Linda looked stricken, her carefully constructed world collapsing around her. "That is not on the agenda," she protested weakly. "We cannot vote on." "Point of order," interrupted Rebecca. "Association bylaws allow for emergency motions when related to ongoing financial matters. This qualifies." Linda looked to the other board members for support but found none. They averted their eyes, sensing the shifting winds. Self-preservation had trumped loyalty. "Fine," Linda said, her voice tight. "A motion of no confidence has been proposed and seconded. Discussion." What followed was 40 minutes of controlled demolition. Homeowners recounted years of selective enforcement, questionable financial decisions, and authoritarian leadership. The tone remained civil but uncompromising. This was not a mob seeking blood. It was a community reclaiming its voice. Throughout the discussion, I remained silent. My presence and actions had catalyzed this moment, but it had grown beyond me now. This was about more than a canoe launch or an insurance policy. It was about accountability. When the time came for the vote, there was no suspense about the outcome. The motion passed by a decisive margin. Linda was removed as president effective immediately, with Vice President Michael Chen elevated to interim leadership pending a special election. Linda sat perfectly still as the results were announced, her face a mask of rigid composure. Then, without a word, she gathered her papers, stood, and walked out of the room. No dramatic declaration, no defense, just the soft click of the door closing behind her, the period at the end of a long, troubled sentence. After the meeting adjourned, Michael Chen approached me in the parking lot. "We would like to discuss the shoreline situation," he said quietly. "Not to challenge your ownership, but to explore a more collaborative approach moving forward." I nodded. I am open to discussion. I never wanted exclusivity, just respect. As I drove home that night, I realized that power rarely changes hands with grand declarations or dramatic confrontations. Sometimes, it happens with paperwork, patience, and the quiet persistence of truth against deception. Linda had built her authority on fear and misinformation. When those foundations crumbled, nothing remained to support her position. The neighborhood would heal now, under new leadership, and with new understanding of what community truly meant. Not uniformity enforced from above, but cooperation built from shared respect. Spring arrived with gentle determination, the way it always does after even the harshest winters. The trees along the shoreline budded with fresh green leaves, and morning mist rose from the water in ethereal patterns. Nature, in its wisdom, continued its cycles regardless of human drama. The new board, led by Michael Chen, approached property matters with a humility their predecessor had lacked. We negotiated a simple, clear agreement regarding the shoreline and launch. The land remained mine legally, but I granted limited access rights to neighborhood residents through a formal easement with specific conditions. My requirements were straightforward: respect for the natural character of the shoreline, no commercial use, proper safety precautions, and a reasonable liability waiver. In exchange, responsible neighbors could once again enjoy water access for canoes, kayaks, and paddleboards. The board readily agreed, grateful for the opportunity to resolve the conflict without further financial damage. I rebuilt the launch dock slightly larger than before, using sustainable materials and design principles that worked with the landscape rather than against it. Neighbors offered to help, turning construction into an impromptu community event. Hands that had once been raised in angry votes now worked together, driving screws and leveling boards in shared purpose. The HOA itself, underwent a transformation more significant than the physical changes to the shoreline. The board rewrote portions of the association charter, implementing new checks and balances on executive authority. They established a transparency committee responsible for ensuring all homeowners had access to complete information about decisions affecting the community. Rules still existed. They were necessary for any functioning community, but they now served the residents rather than controlling them. One morning in late April, I arrived at the launch to find a small bronze plaque installed at the entrance to the path. It read simply, "Wilson's Landing, a place of shared respect." The gesture moved me deeply, not because it carried my name, but because it captured the true spirit of what we had regained. Linda listed her house for sale in May. The moving trucks came on a Tuesday while most neighbors were at work. There was no farewell party, no community card. Her departure was as quiet as a shadow at noon, noticed mainly by its absence. I sometimes wondered if she had learned anything from the experience or if she had simply moved on to impose her will on some other unsuspecting community. I hoped for the former but suspected the latter. On particularly clear mornings, I still follow my ritual. Coffee in one hand, paddle in the other, I make my way to the water before the neighborhood fully wakes. But something has changed in me as well. The solitude I once jealously guarded now feels less essential. I find myself appreciating the occasional company of a neighbor launching their kayak or a family teaching children about respecting nature. Power, I have learned, comes in many forms. There is the obvious power of rules and fines and fences, but there is also the quieter power of patience, of knowledge, and of standing firm on solid ground. Linda had wielded the first kind, believing it absolute. I had discovered the second, finding it far more durable. As I paddle across the morning still water, watching light play across the surface, I think about how conflicts shape us. This battle over a small stretch of shoreline had revealed the best and worst of human nature, pettiness and generosity, control and freedom, fear and courage. The water accepts it all without judgment, continuing its ancient rhythm of ebb and flow. Some lessons arrive with thunder, others seep in slowly, like morning mist on calm water. But both can change the landscape of our lives if we are wise enough to learn.